So I know a lot of people have been asking me to make this video, and part of the reason I've been holding off on making it was, well, one, I took a little break over Labor Day weekend to spend some time with my family, and I had some pre-recorded videos for that time, but also because it seemed like every time there was a potential prospect that the Bulls could go after, or there were rumors being linked to a player, said player would get snatched up by another team. But in today's video, with the free agents and options left on the market for the Bulls, we're going to talk about who the Bulls could potentially sign for the remaining 2 roster spots. So what's going on, everyone? You are listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. So as of right now, and again, this could even change by the time you're watching this, but currently the Bulls have 13 men signed to the roster, which leaves 2 roster spots available for this upcoming season. Now, when you look at the roster as a whole, it's pretty clear that the biggest hole right now is at the power forward position, really front court depth in general. The Bulls are more than covered in the backcourt with guys like Lonzo, Lavine, Kobe White, Alex Caruso, Dosunmu, even Javonte Green, depending on what position he plays. And then, of course, you have your wing players at the 3 in DeMar DeRozan, Troy Brown Jr., Derrick Jones Jr., and of course, even Patrick Williams, who is also capable of playing the 3. He played small forward most of the season last year. And then at center, you really have 3 guys in Nikola Vucevic, Tony Bradley, and the rookie Marko Simonovic. And then when you look at the 4 spot, you've got Patrick Williams, and that's kind of it. I mean, obviously, you have guys like DeRozan, who is very much capable of playing a small ball power forward. He did a lot of that last season in San Antonio. Simonovic, although better positioned as a center, can also play the 4, and at this point will likely probably be needing to. I mean, maybe you could have Derrick Jones Jr. play some 4, but even that is kind of a stretch, especially at 6'5". So really, when you look at these 2 remaining roster spots, the Bulls need a power forward, a very solid backup power forward. Now, of course, what most Bulls fans thought was going to happen, including myself, was that they were going to get the veteran Paul Millsap. Millsap, not the same player that he used to be, but a very serviceable power forward who can play defense, get some boards, and provide some veteran leadership off of the bench. And of course, there was also the Arturas connection, given AK was the guy who brought Millsap to Denver from Atlanta. But as we found out just a few days ago, that although the Bulls were considered strong contenders to land Millsap, he ultimately decided to sign with the Nets, and actually for less money than what the Bulls could have offered him, which, yes, it's annoying because it's the Nets and everyone is just kind of making their way over to that team to chase a ring. But at the same time, I get it. If you're a vet who likely only has a couple of seasons left in the NBA and you want to end your career with a championship, yeah, that might be a good option. I get it. Was I disappointed that Millsap didn't sign with the Bulls and chose the Nets over us? Hell yeah, I was. But I think Millsap, would have been a great fit on this Bulls team, and you could never go wrong with some additional veteran leaders, especially since we lost our veteran leaders in Thaddeus Young and Garrett Temple. But honestly, that's just the fact of the matter of where the Bulls are at right now versus a team like the Nets. The Bulls, yes, greatly improved and are much more attractive than they were. They have really been in years in enticing free agents, but if you're a veteran looking to win a championship before retiring, at least for this upcoming season anyway, you're going to choose the Nets over the Bulls. Annoying, but that's just where the Bulls are right now. They're not there quite yet in terms of being that championship contender. Then, shortly after Millsap signed, there were rumors that the Bulls were going to be frontrunners in landing Lamarcus Aldridge after he was cleared by doctors to come out of retirement and play in the NBA again. But like Millsap, Lamarcus Aldridge decided to sign with the Nets as well, which is crazy that the Nets are going to have 3 power forwards in Millsap, Aldridge, and Blake Griffin, but whatever. To be honest, though, I think the Bulls dodged a bullet in this one. I don't think that Lamarcus Aldridge would have been a good fit on the Bulls because he's not even close to the player he used to be. And unlike Millsap, he's not even a strong defender and has really fallen off in terms of his efficiency, even on offense, especially with what we saw in his short stint with the Nets before he retired this past season. Then, of course, the Nets traded DeAndre Jordan to the Pistons, who the Pistons waived and bought out his contract. And before that rumor could even kick off that the Bulls might go after him, well, that was quickly shut down when it was announced that Jordan was going to be signing with the Lakers once he clears waivers. So there's that. The main guys that would have otherwise been good fits for the Bulls or linked to the Bulls in some way have all gone in other directions. So the question now becomes, well, who are the Bulls going to fill these final roster spots with the very limited free agents available and the limited remaining cap space that the Bulls have? Now, there have been some names thrown around that I'm sure most of you guys have seen from various news articles that could be potential options. You have guys like Eliza Johnson, who was just released from the Brooklyn Nets. He was a former second-round pick in the 2018 draft, still very young, only 25, but has really played limited time in the NBA. He hasn't even played 50 games in his whole NBA career, but he is a 6'7" power forward and would fit the mold for what the Bulls are looking for. Then you also have Jared Vanderbilt, another young power forward, another former second-round pick, and although started out his NBA career as kind of a non-factor, he really upped his game this past season playing for the Timberwolves, playing 64 games and starting 30 of them. He's a pretty good rebounder and a decent defender at that, and the limited minutes that he's played. Not a good three-point shooter and also a very bad free throw shooter, but he can give you a decent 10 to 15 minutes off the bench, which is what the Bulls are going to need in that role. Then, of course, there is also Demarcus Cousins, one of the few remaining free agent big names, the former All-Star and All-NBA player who is really a center but can also play the four. He could be a potential option that you could get on a minimum deal and likely even a non-guaranteed deal should things not work out. I mean, the thing with Cousins is you run the risk of him being a locker room problem or an on-the-court problem with his attitude. However, at the same time, you're also talking about a guy who was a former four-time All-Star, two-time All-NBA player. He was a franchise player for the Sacramento Kings, and then he completely fell off and is a shell of himself, all because of really two major injuries. So Cousins has all of the motivation in the world to at least try and revitalize his career to get even back to 50% of what he used to be and be a productive and impactful player off the bench for a playoff team. Kind of like Derrick Rose. He fell off after all of his injuries with the Bulls, and then he was traded, and then, he sort of regained and revitalized his career now, especially most recently in that playoff run that they had with the Knicks. So the other thing the Bulls could use is that fire and energy to get other guys hyped up, which Cousins brings. The Bulls have really missed that intensity since the Tom Thibodeau years, so I can see the benefits to signing Cousins, especially if you can get him on a minimum non-guaranteed deal. But at the same time, we also know that Cousins still has his injury issues and hasn't been that impactful on the recent teams that he's played for. Now, all of these options aside, I honestly think the most likely, or I guess I should say, in my view, the best case scenario for the Bulls is to bring in a power forward by way of a trade. Because look, the options of Vanderbilt, Johnson, or even Cousins, those aren't going to move the needle for the Bulls. And with all of the changes the Bulls did make to improve this roster, the last thing you want to do is leave a gap in the front court because you really only have one power forward, and the second unit suffers as a result. Now you might be asking, well, what the heck would the Bulls trade for? They basically traded away all of their assets. And no, I'm not talking about trading away Kobe White, because I've said before, it's too early to give up on Kobe. They need to at least give him this season to see how he recovers from his shoulder injury and see how he fits with this new roster, and then determine what to do with him next offseason. No, I'm talking about potentially trading the first round pick that they just acquired in the Lauri Markkanen trade, the lottery protected pick that they got from the Portland Trail Blazers. And the reason I think it would make sense to trade that pick, again, only if the return for trading said pick is enticing enough, but the reason I think it makes sense is because, one, the Bulls already have their first round pick for 2022. And don't get me wrong, having another first round pick to go along with it would be great, but the fact still remains that with everything this front office did this offseason, they are going all in. They're not focusing on building up through the draft, as evident by all the first round picks they traded away. So when you already have a first round pick for this upcoming draft, you have somewhat of a narrow window, or I guess I should say a narrow prime window for guys like DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic, even Zach Lavine. You have to remember, he's going to be a free agent next season. Do you really need two first round picks, which are going to be mid to late first rounders for players who are likely going to take a few years to develop? Keep the pick that you have and use the other that you just acquired as a trade asset to bring in a quality backup power forward, not someone that's going to develop years from now in a draft that isn't even going to be happening until next offseason. I'm talking about guys like Marvin Bagley, who the Kings have been rumored to be shopping, and because it's the Kings, they're likely going to need as many first-round picks as they can get. Bagley's still young, can rebound, has improved his outside shot so he can help you spread the floor, and I think in a new environment, a winning environment, hopefully, he'll be able to thrive much more than where he's at right now in Sacramento. Or a guy like Robert Covington, who we've talked a little bit about before on the channel, a solid defender, a veteran player, or maybe even a player like Jay Crowder, a hustle player on the defensive end who was a very impactful player for both the Heat in their finals run and then the Suns in their finals run last year. A first round pick for Jay Crowder and for Robert Covington, yeah, a bit much, but you get the idea. Players that are at that level, a level above guys like Vanderbilt, Johnson, Cousins, and would accept a role off the bench at power forward. And I think teams would bite on a first round pick for these guys, even if the pick is in fact lottery protected. Now, I know some people have been asking me whether we could somehow get Thaddeus Young back via a trade with the Spurs. Well, let me just say, as much as I would love Thad back on this roster, and honestly, he would be the perfect fit at the 4 coming off the bench for the Bulls, as he played it so well last season, being our leading 6th man. A trade to get Thaddeus back is not going to happen. Not because the Spurs wouldn't take a first round pick for Thaddeus Young, but more so because the Bulls simply cannot afford him. They don't have the cap space to take on his $14.2 million contract. It's part of the reason they traded him, to free up that cap space to be able to sign DeRozan. Not only that, but it would be a bad trade on the Bulls' part, because as much as he fits on this roster, you're not going to trade a first round pick for a 33-year-old on an expiring contract at that. It just doesn't make sense. The only way that Thaddeus could come back to the Bulls is if for some reason the Spurs decide to buy out the last year of his contract to free up cap space, and then he becomes a free agent and the Bulls pick him up on a cheap deal in free agency. But I just really don't see that happening. I don't see the Spurs doing that, not when he's on an expiring contract. If anything, they'll just trade him to try to get something in return rather than buying him out, taking that salary hit to have him go play for another team. So again, as much as I would love to have Thaddeus back, it's just not going to happen. It wouldn't work, practically speaking. But Thaddeus Young aside, I would love to see the front office continue to be aggressive in shipping that first round pick that they just acquired to find their backup power forward, because the remaining options available as free agents are not really going to add a ton of value to this roster that the Bulls are going to need in that role. I want to know what you guys think though. What do you think the Bulls should do to fill out the final roster spots for this team? Let me know in the comments, and as always, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I do post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.